funny, I'm having technical difficulties right now. Filmed the video without this slide on because of me messing up. The second thing that happened was my stereo cable wasn't being registered by my camera, so I have this awesome footage and a fun spontaneous moment for my cat, and guess what? I can't use it. I don't have any audio. Anyway guys, what's going on? I'm Chris Daniels, aka CD Play 0, and today we're going to continue that history theme and look at some styles of fingerboard riders from the early days. This is going to be pre-Tech Deck and maybe seep into the early Tech Deck days from 1998 until probably 2001, 2002-ish. Back during those time periods, we didn't have really anything to go off of in terms of inspiration from other fingerboarders besides our own friends that we know from skateboarding. The early days of fingerboarding really was just the wild west of styles. You'll see such innovative and cool and fun techniques. So we're going to be looking across a bunch of different riders from the early days and compare and contrast kind of the techniques that they're using, what they're doing that contributes towards their style, and how that influenced today. Instead of me just talking a lot right here, we're going to go up into my computer and take a look at some footage, and we'll share it with you guys. Do a little bit of analysis on there. So let's dive right in. All right, the first fingerboarder we're gonna look at is Martin Winkler. Right away, if you watch him on that kickflip backside lip slide, and even this one, you'll see that he does an upright fingerboard stance, at least when he lands. Additionally, on those early two tricks he did there, he also does almost a half tuck or a semi-curled fingers. Another thing you'll notice with Martin Winkler is that he does realistic tricks. He flows a lot, he moves realistically, especially in the vert realm. He's just amazing there. He doesn't do too exaggerated of height or motions when he does tricks. Very rooted in skateboarding, realistic tricks, relatively realistic height for the most part, at least compared to other fingerboarders at the time. I mean, check a look at that. I mean, just take a look at this kickflip back tail and then this 3-flip crooked grind. Just unreal. Also, you'll see him when he's doing vert, this style where he has upright fingers right there. His style is just legendary. He influenced fingerboarders such as Nick Herzog, who went on to influence other style lords like Nico Frank, Joaquin Mendez, and a handful of other fingerboarders that you all know and love today. Here's some newer clips from him from probably 2001 from Pissing Fingers 1. And just again, realistic trick style. He has untucked for the most part, but then when he does ride upright like he's doing here in the bowl, he kind of does a half tuck. His trick selection is just great for the time period. No one was fingerboarding like him at this time. He definitely was one of the best, if not the best, fingerboarder style-wise during this time period. I mean, we'll just end it on that. Gosh, this vert line is just so good. So good. Kickflip backside tail. I remember watching that trick and was just like, what? Oh my gosh. All right, next up, we have another legend from the early days, and that is Denis Stimac. You can see here he's doing this early kickflip on a toy fingerboard. This was way before Tech Deck. This footage is from like 1993. Keep that in mind. This dude was doing all those tricks before Tech Decks on a toy. Look at that. 360 flip blunt. He has kind of a similar style actually to Martin Winkler in a lot of ways. In fact, the way he moves his hands is very similar, which is interesting. One thing you should note here is that his boards do not have grip tape at that time, and you just saw the last two tricks where he did a heel flip, and I forgot what the other trick was. It looked like a 360 flip out of something. And he uses the pressure on one side of the board and the stickiness of his fingers to cause those heel flips and those flip rotations. The thing with Denis is that he can do tricks with grip tape too. You'll see some clips later on with the tech deck. So he's not limited to that style. It's just how he learned how to do fingerboard tricks. So he's untucked for his style for the most part, but he lands upright. He does tricks with his fingers upright as well. Starts off is on his finger pads when he does a trick, but then when he lands, he prefers to land on his fingertips. We call that finger tipping. And again, just watch that clean style. Super good fingerboarder. One of the legends back in the day. I know so many fingerboarders from the early North American and English-speaking communities idolized Denis. And here we go. Now we're gonna see him do tricks with the tech deck. Clearly didn't need to rely on the pressure flipping. He does a little bit of it, but still just an amazing fingerboarder overall. You can see here he actually was doing kind of a semi-tuck in the bowl, and so far that's been a trend for our first two fingerboarders. Next up, guys, we're gonna take a look at two legends from the fingerboard scene. They were in Fingers of Fury, which was the first fingerboard videos that I saw of people fingerboarding outside of my middle school. So the first fingerboarder we're gonna look at is Damien Bernadet. And Damien is a legend. He owns Close Up Fingerboards, still supporting the community to this day. Heck of a guy. So right away I noticed that when you compare Denis Stimac's style and Martin Winkler's to Damien, he does a little bit more exaggerated in terms of trick height and kind of the motions that he does. I love his style so much. When I first was fingerboarding, he was my favorite fingerboarder. Him and Tony Pauthex, who we'll do next. A little bit of an almost carrying motion when he does flip tricks. You can see his hands go a little bit upside down, but still super clean. He's an amazing skateboarder, obviously, and everything is rooted in skateboarding at the end of the day, but he just does the tricks a little bit larger. And keep in mind, again, this footage is before tech deck. This is from 1996 in their video Finger Skate Embryo. Tray flip with his boards, and man, just a crazy trick selection. Like, I can't even believe they're doing these tricks into grinds back then, before tech deck was around. So if you look at his hands, he has an untucked style. He's on his finger pads. He lands on his finger pads. He does a little bit of a scooping motion when he does flip tricks. Hand may or may not like go upside down on certain stuff like a tray flip. But still, amazing fingerboarder. One of my favorites all times. Absolute legend. And next up, we're going to be looking at Tony Pauthex. Starts off huge right away. Kickflip transfer from the frickin' bathtub to a sink. That's insane. So here's the thing with Tony Pauthex and Damien Bernadet. They have very similar styles. Both of them are great skateboarders. They both kind of have a similar style in which they scoop up the board. Like, they do the ollie, and they kind of carry the board in a way. Their hand may or may not go upside down on a tray flip or on a kick flip. They kind of roll that board to do heel flips. They kind of scoop the board to do a kick flip. It's an interesting style that was kind of common in the early days. Again, a little bit more exaggerated on kind of the tricks that they do in terms of height, but all the tricks are rooted in skateboarding. You can even see here, he mimics the tricks that he does in real life on the fingerboard that he does in skateboarding. Again, just like Damien Bernadet, this is footage done before tech decks. These are boards that they made themselves, and they fashioned themselves. And they were inspired by themselves and each other. And the tricks that they're doing here, just insane. So, Tony Pauthex, I believe, is still in Dijon. He has a skate shop, I believe, still. I saw it open the other day on Google Maps. And I think he probably still has that turntable skate park that's so legendary for fingerboarders out there that we gotta see in Fingers of Fury. I mean, I love these guys. One day I'll meet both of them. I can't wait for that day because they are the people that I idolized almost the most back in the day. Next up, we have a fingerboarder that is one of my favorite all time. It's Darin Langhorst. Right away, you'll notice that he does tricks that are rooted in skateboarding, like the rest of our crew here. Yet he keeps it very realistic height and look for the everything here is about proportion, kind of like Martin Winkler, to what skateboarding would be like. His tricks don't go way too high. They're really close to the obstacle, and he just has a really clean skateboard style on his fingers. He does his tricks untucked, like everybody else here, at least to start out with, and he fingerboards on his finger pads rather than his fingertips. One thing I'll note is that he does not use grip tape when he fingerboards. This was actually really common in the old days. We used to remove the grip tape because you could get some stickiness out of it. It made heel flips pretty easy and kick flips relatively easy as well when compared to having to do it with the Tech Deck grip tape. Yeah, Darin Langhorst is an absolute legend. Huge shout out to that guy. Just an amazing fingerboarder. All right, guys, the next fingerboarder we have here is Matt Johnson of Fingers of Fury and Flying Fingers fame. There was actually a Flying Fingers 2 that used to be online that he released. Unfortunately, Matt deleted those videos from the internet, and I cannot find a copy for the life of me. Had some awesome footage of the tour that he did with the Coca-Cola fingerboard team down, I think, in South America, and you got to see a demo of them fingerboarding for like this huge group of kids. It was amazing. I wish we still had that video. Here you see him start right away with that 360 native spin on top of that bottle. Switch hard flip backside lip slide. Again, he's not using any grip tape. If you look closely, doesn't have any grip tape on there. And he's using the pressure of his fingers plus the moisture to cause the board to be lifted into the air. He does do a little bit of an ollie pop, but he's using the stickiness and pressure of the board to perform his tricks. He was doing some very advanced tricks, switch tricks, nollie tricks. Just a great skilled fingerboarder right here. He had an untucked style. His tricks were both rooted in skateboarding, and sometimes they're very realistic height-wise. Other times they're slightly a bit exaggerated in terms of height for his tricks, like that one. But man, he had the coolest fingerboard park ever. I love watching his old Flying Fingers parts. He was extremely technically sound. I mean, that trick right there is really difficult even nowadays, and he was doing this in 1997, 1998. Just really good tech combos here. And here's what I'm talking about where you have the exaggerated fingerboarding. He does do some of it right there. So this massive kickflip right there, just insanely huge, was leveraging, his own items in his home, like his fridge right now, and doing these massive kickflips up to nose blunts. I'm guilty of doing this even nowadays. I'll find a wall like in my elevator of my old building, and I used to fingerboard on the wall and do exactly what he's doing right now inside the elevator going up to my room. Matt Johnson is an absolute legend in fingerboarding, hugely influential to fingerboarders, especially to me personally, and I really wish we can get some copies of Flying Fingers and Flying Fingers 2 online. Another fingerboarder from the old days is Timo Kranz, aka TKY, one of the most influential fingerboarders ever in the history of fingerboarding. Thing with Timo Kranz is that his style is great. It reminds me of like Damien Bernadet and Tony Pauthex, but then a lot of grabbing and a lot of unique tricks that are very different from these other fingerboarders. He wasn't limited by trying to do realistic height-wise there. He didn't mind going a little bit exaggerated in terms of height-wise, but it didn't matter. His style is so unique. It's him, and I love his style so much. Another fingerboarder from the early days that I looked up to a ton back in the day was Beau Marchant. The thing with Beau is I don't know when he started fingerboarding, if he started before Tech Deck or right after Tech Deck, but he had my favorite style. It's still one of my favorite styles of all time. He does untucked style, very common for the early days of fingerboarding, but he would land on his fingertips sometimes on his finger pads. You'll notice that he does very technical tricks here, especially for that time, at a very low height. Just an amazingly skilled fingerboarder, and this footage is from 2000. Some of his footage is from 1999, and he was just a legendary talent. It's too bad we don't have much footage of him, unfortunately. He has some of the most legendary tricks I've seen from the early days of fingerboarding. Alright, you guys know me pretty well, so you probably know who the last fingerboarder is. It's myself. You know I love talking about myself. So, at the beginning of this footage, it's actually my friend Min, who doesn't fingerboard anymore, but we were like really good friends in middle school and would fingerboard together, and he was very influential on me. Here's me doing a kickflip manual, Nollie Impossible 5-0. If you watch closely on that trick, on the Nollie tricks, I scoop by using my ring finger to grab the board and to pop the Nollie. I was a cheater back then. Luckily, like not too long after that clips, I learned how to do them properly and never had that problem again. One thing you'll notice about my style is that I was untucked. Sometimes I would land on my fingertips, sometimes I would land on my finger pads, sometimes I would land and curl after do kind of a semi-tuck on tricks. Additionally, the height of my tricks were relatively realistic. I didn't exaggerate my height at all. They were pretty close to what you saw Beau Marchant do. He was my idol back then for fingerboarding. Also Darin Langhorst too. Again, you'll see a lot of the sloppy tricks in here, but it was okay back then as long as you landed the trick or got close to landing a difficult trick. People kind of overlooked it. Style wasn't as important back then. You could get away with a lot. So I was doing a lot of switch heel flip tricks, which is kind of surprising for that time. Not many people were doing switch or nollie heel flips at all, actually. Like this nollie heel flip backside lip slide was pretty slick. Nollie flip blunt slide was pretty dope. I guess that's a blunt slide, not really. A lot of DIY stuff that I used, which you notice a lot of fingerboarders did back then. And that's what my style is in a nutshell. We'll end it with this: the cleanest nollie frontside flip ever, and the cleanest heel flip tail slide ever to fingertip landing. Alright guys, so, just looking at all that footage and kind of seeing what the commonalities between the fingerboarding styles were back then, you kind of had two different camps of trick styles in a way. You had those that were trying to do their tricks in proportion to skateboarding height of tricks. That would be like Denis Stimac, Darin Langhorst, Martin Winkler, and me. And then you had people that were doing, that were not limited by that proportion. And that would include the fingerboarders like Damien Bernadet, Tony Pauthex, Timo, Kranz, and Matt Johnson. Unfortunately, nowadays, people don't really explore that type of fingerboarding too much, exploring how high they can do a trick, which I think is, kind of regrettable in the way. So anybody that wants to experiment with their style and try some exaggerated height tricks, you definitely should. It's really fun. I do that for fun too in some of my videos as well. I think it's really fun to do. Another commonality during this time period is you didn't really see tucking, at least before the trick was landed. You did see some half tucks or semi tucks from like Denis Stimac, Martin Winkler, my footage, like Beau sometimes, when you would land a trick a certain way on your fingertips, but you didn't see tucking prior to the trick, you rode with your fingers untucked. This was extremely common back in the day. Now you see people are doing full tucks, which means that their thumb is holding together their pinky and their ring fingers, preventing it from going out. You'll see people doing semi-tuck or half-tucked like I do and a lot of other fingerboarders do. You still have some people that are untucked, but it's definitely in far less proportion than it used to be. Lastly, you notice that cleanliness of tricks wasn't as important, but you still saw some fantastic trick selection and amazing tricks that were happening back in the day. One thing to keep in mind is that the cleanliness of tricks was impacted by the gear that we had. I promise you, if we had 32mm decks, heck, even 29mm decks back then, tricks would have looked so much cleaner and so much better, and we would have become a lot better fingerboarders faster. So thank you so much, guys, for listening to this analysis of the fingerboarding styles from the old days. I'm your host, Chris Daniels, aka CD Player Zero, and thank you for taking the time for going through this analysis of fingerboarding styles with me from the old days. Would love to get a comment and some feedback about what you think about this video. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. If you want to hear more of my content, be sure to click that notification bell and you will get notified when I have a new video that's released. Much love to you all. Take care. Later, guys.